The millionaire spent his entire fortune on the best doctors in the world, but nothing could fulfill his dream of seeing his wheelchair-bound son walk. When a humble cleaning lady was hired, he did not imagine that hope was about to return. One day, he came home early and heard laughter coming from the living room. The scene he saw made him break down in tears. The cleaning lady had used her own knowledge to build an improvised support and, with angelic patience, was teaching the boy to take his first steps. It was when she rolled up her pant leg, revealing her own prosthesis, that the father understood she was not just cleaning his house, but healing his son with the power of her own overcoming. Arthur Sterling stared at the picture frame on the marble mantelpiece, an island of warmth and color in an ocean of silence and gray tones. The photograph, taken little more than a year ago, seemed to belong to another life, a parallel dimension where happiness was palpable. In it, his wife, Laura, smiled with her eyes, her golden hair blowing in the wind on a sun-drenched beach, while little Leo, with his 5-year-old agile legs, ran toward the waves, leaving a trail of footprints in the wet sand. The sound of their laughter still echoed in his memory, a phantom melody that refused to fade. Now, the mansion, a monument built with the profits from his vast businesses and investments, was merely a mausoleum of memories. Every silent hallway, every immaculate room seemed to mock him, a constant reminder that all his fortune, his immense portfolio, was useless. He was a billionaire, a man whose capital could move the stock market, but he couldn't move his own son's legs. The scent of antiseptic, subtle but persistent, invaded his nostrils, overpowering the faint aroma of the leather sofas and polished wood furniture. It was the smell of manufactured hope, of exorbitant treatments, of a science that promised miracles and delivered only routine. Since the accident, the house had been transformed. Where toys were once scattered, there was now physical therapy equipment. Where children's songs once played, there was now the monotonous hum of machines and the restrained footsteps of the medical staff. Arthur looked out the panoramic window, which framed a perfectly manicured garden, a green carpet that Leo would never step on again. What good was so much money if the one thing in the world he desired wasn't for sale? He would sell all his shares, liquidate all his investment funds, surrender every ounce of gold he owned, just to see Leo take a single step on that lawn. Firm, rhythmic footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of Eleanor, the head nurse. She was the personification of efficiency, always in her impeccably white uniform, a clipboard in hand. Her eyes were cool and analytical, and her tone of voice never wavered. "Mr. Sterling," she began without preamble, "the reports from today's session are in. There's been no change in the neuromuscular response. The patterns remain the same." The sentence was delivered with the neutrality of someone reading the weather forecast, but to Arthur, each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his hopes. He turned to face her, despair forming a knot in his throat. "But what about the new electrical stimulation protocol? The specialists in Zurich guaranteed—" Eleanor cut him off with an almost imperceptible wave of her hand. "Science has its limits, sir. We need to be realistic and focus on adaptation, not reversal. Leo needs to accept his condition to have any quality of life." The word accept landed like an anvil in the silence of the room. To Arthur, accepting was synonymous with giving up, and he couldn't give up. Not while there was a breath of hope, however faint. He felt exhausted, drained by the daily battle against a relentless reality. The weight of his wealth seemed to crush him, a mountain of resources that was useless for what truly mattered. As Eleanor continued to talk about new wheelchair routines and occupational therapies, Arthur's mind switched off. He just nodded, his gaze lost in the photograph. It was then that a sound broke the monotony of the house, a soft, almost timid but clear sound, the doorbell. No one ever came unannounced. He frowned, confused. With a silent wave to dismiss the nurse, he went to the door himself. When he opened it, he was met with a figure who did not belong in that world of clinical precision and restrained sorrow. She was a middle-aged woman in simple clothes, a colorful bandana tied in her hair, and a smile that radiated a disarming kindness. Her eyes, a deep brown, seemed to see beyond the facade of power and pain. She held a cloth bag, and her posture was one of a serenity that contrasted violently with the storm inside him. "Good morning," she said, her voice as soft as velvet. "I'm Claire. I'm here about the housekeeper position." Claire's presence in the mansion was like a soft musical note in a symphony of silence and steel. In the first few days, she moved with an almost invisible discretion, mapping the contours of the sadness that permeated every room. The house, despite its architectural splendor and the luxury goods it housed, seemed sick, suffering from an apathy that not even the brilliant sunlight pouring through the immense windows could dispel. Claire felt the weight of grief and frustration in every object she dusted, on every floor she waxed. The air was thin, heavy with unfulfilled expectations. It was on the third day that she saw Leo for the first time. He was in his room, a space that should have been a child's refuge, but looked more like a hospital annex. His wheelchair was positioned near the window, and he was throwing a small basketball against the wall with surprising force. The sound, muffled and rhythmic, was the only sign of pulsating life on that floor. Claire paused in the doorway, the bucket and mop forgotten in her hands. The boy didn't notice her. His eyes were fixed on the invisible target on the wall. His brow furrowed in concentration. Each throw was precise, methodical. His arms, shoulders, and torso moved in a powerful harmony, a ballet of contained strength. Just then, Eleanor passed by in the hall, and her glance at the scene was sharp. "A useless compensation," she whispered to Claire, with ill-disguised contempt. "The brain tries to find other avenues of expression. It's just a reflex, not progress." The nurse continued on her way, leaving her poisonous words hanging in the air. But Claire didn't see a compensation. She saw discipline. She saw a fire that refused to be extinguished, an energy in desperate need of a direction. Meanwhile, Arthur isolated himself in his office, a sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the city he had helped build. He spent hours on calls with specialists around the world, negotiating with labs, analyzing data from clinical trials. His mind, accustomed to calculating investment risks and predicting stock market fluctuations, now applied itself to medicine with the same intensity. He moved his vast capital like a general moving his troops, attacking his son's paralysis on all fronts. He spoke of millions of dollars as casually as other people spoke of the weather, but every conversation ended with the same frustrating conclusion. There were no guarantees, only remote possibilities. He was buying hope in the most volatile market of all, and the dividends never came. That afternoon, while cleaning the living room, Claire watched Leo pass by in his wheelchair. He didn't look at her. His eyes were downcast, lost in an inner world. She felt a pang of compassion that was different from pity. It wasn't for the boy in the wheelchair, but for the loneliness that emanated from him. It was the same loneliness she saw in Arthur's eyes, an island of pain surrounded by a fortune that couldn't build a bridge. At the end of the day, as Leo repeated his ritual with the basketball, Claire watched him again. She saw the twisting motion of his torso, the way he used his entire upper body to propel the ball. In that repetitive, almost angry gesture, she didn't just see the frustration of a trapped boy. She saw the seed of something more, a possibility that everyone, in their frantic search for a cure for his legs, had failed to see. The routine in the Sterling mansion was governed by Eleanor's iron discipline. She handed Claire a detailed schedule, with times and tasks that left no room for improvisation. "Your job, Claire, is to maintain the hygiene of the environment. You are to be efficient and, above all, invisible. Do not interfere with the medical routines, and please, do not attempt to interact with the boy. He needs a controlled environment, not distractions. The nurse's voice was like the click of a safety lock, final and unquestionable. Claire just nodded, her gentle smile unwavering. But inside, a seed of rebellion began to sprout. Being invisible was impossible when you saw so clearly the pain everyone pretended didn't exist. She understood the need for order, but the emotional sterility of that house was, in her opinion, more harmful than any bacteria. One day, while tidying Leo's room, she found a sketchbook hidden under the bed. Carefully, she flipped through it. The pages were filled with vibrant figures, heroes with flowing capes leaping from buildings, running faster than the wind, and flying toward the sun. There wasn't a single seated figure. They were all movement, freedom, and strength. Claire's heart ached. That sketchbook was a map of the boy's soul, a testament to his deepest desires. With a gentle gesture, she put the sketchbook back in its place. The next day, while cleaning the windowsill, she left behind a small, smooth, grey riverstone she had found in the garden. It was a small, silent gesture, a message that needed no words. Arthur, for his part, was immersed in a new and promising battlefront. A biotech company in California, a pioneer in stem cell therapy, had published encouraging preliminary results. For him, this was like getting a hot stock tip. He mobilized part of his fortune, making a high-risk investment that made his financial advisors break out in a cold sweat. Arthur, the return is purely speculative. We're talking about an extremely volatile asset, his wealth manager warned. But Arthur wasn't thinking about profit. He was investing in a miracle, wiring a sum that could buy a small island, all in the hope of regenerating a single nerve in his son's spinal cord. The distance between the coldness of the numbers on his screen and the heat of his desire was an abyss that was consuming him. In the days that followed, Claire continued her silent ritual, leaving a new stone on the window each morning. On Friday, upon entering the room, she noticed something different. Leo wasn't with his basketball. He was sitting in his chair near the window, holding the ball in his lap, but his eyes were fixed on her movements as she cleaned. There was a curiosity in his gaze, a spark of interest she hadn't seen before. He seemed to be studying her, waiting for something. When she approached the window to leave the day's stone, their eyes met for a brief instant. Leo didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. And for the first time since she had arrived, Claire felt she wasn't cleaning a museum of sorrow, but a place where life, stubbornly, still insisted on sprouting. The idea came from an old memory, an echo of her own youth. Claire remembered the long years of gymnastics training, the iron discipline and the body awareness that had become a part of her. She remembered how her coaches emphasized the strength of the core, the center of all power, the engine that drove the arms and legs. Looking at Leo and the strength he displayed in his torso and arms, a connection formed in her mind. She couldn't offer a medical treatment. She had no degrees or knowledge of advanced therapies, but she had the knowledge of her own body and the memory of what it took to make it strong. And so, the following Monday, during her designated lunch break, she did something unthinkable in that rigidly controlled environment. Instead of retreating to the staff kitchen, she spread a small yoga mat, which she had brought in her bag, in the center of the vast living room. The house was silent. Save for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock, Leo was in the adjacent hallway, reading a book, but Claire knew he would see her. She said nothing. She just began to move. Her exercises were simple but executed with a precision and control that bordered on artistry. Planks, torso twists, hip raises. Each movement was slow, deliberate, a silent demonstration of strength and balance. She breathed audibly and rhythmically, the sound filling the oppressive silence of the house. She didn't invite him, didn't look in his direction. The act was for her, but the audience was him. As expected, it didn't take long for Eleanor to appear. Her shoes made a sharp, irritated sound on the marble floor. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was an icy hiss. "This is a private residence, not a gym. Your behavior is inappropriate and utterly unprofessional. Get up immediately." Claire finished her movement calmly, sat back on her heels, and looked at the nurse. "It's my lunch break, Miss Eleanor. I'm not bothering anyone." "You are disturbing the order of this house," the nurse retorted, her face red with indignation. But before she could continue, a sound interrupted them. It was the soft hum of Leo's power chair approaching. He stopped at the entrance to the room, the book forgotten in his lap. His eyes fixed not on Eleanor but on Claire. His expression was one of pure fascination. Eleanor, realizing she had lost control of the situation, shot a withering glare at Claire and retreated, muttering about reporting the insubordination to Mr. Sterling. Claire, for her part, got up, rolled up her mat, and went back to her work as if nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted. She had planted a seed, not of false hope, but of possibility. Later that day, when the house was quiet again, Claire passed discreetly by the living room. The scene she saw made her stop and hold her breath. Leo had positioned himself in the middle of the room, in the same spot where she had been. He was leaning forward, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair, his body tilted. With a grunt of effort, he was trying to imitate the torso twist he had seen her do. The movement was clumsy, limited, but it was there. It was the first step. The silent communication between Claire and Leo evolved. The stones she left on the window in the morning were now found in the afternoon, carefully arranged in small circles or straight lines on his nightstand. It was Leo's reply, his way of saying, "I see you." The atmosphere in the boys' room, though still silent, seemed less laden with despair and more permeated with an expectant curiosity. Claire, sensing this opening, decided to take another step. On one of her days off, she bought a small succulent in a clay pot. The next day, she placed it beside the arranged stones on Leo's table. When he questioned her with his eyes, she simply said, in her soft voice, "Succulents hold water inside themselves to survive in the hardest places. Even things that seem small and still can be incredibly strong and full of life on the inside." Leo touched one of the plant's thick leaves. The metaphor hanging between them perfectly understood. Meanwhile, Arthur's world was a whirlwind of numbers and charts. An unexpected crisis in the Asian markets had triggered a sharp drop in the stock market, and the value of his shares in several tech companies plummeted. He spent 2 straight days locked in his office, in conference calls with his brokers in New York and London, moving his net worth, selling some assets, and buying others in a frantic attempt to mitigate the losses. He was a master at navigating these financial storms, but the total dedication it required distanced him even further from the quiet transformation taking place under his own roof. He noticed that Leo seemed a bit more alert, less apathetic, but attributed it to some new medication or therapy adjustment without investigating further. The presence of the plant in Leo's room did not go unnoticed by Eleanor. To her, it was an unacceptable breach of protocol. Plants can harbor mold and insects. It is a biological risk in an environment that must be sterile, she declared, standing in the doorway with the clear intention of removing the small pot. "It's just a succulent. It won't harm anyone," replied Claire, who was finishing cleaning the room. "Rules are rules. The plant goes," Eleanor said, reaching out to grab it. It was then that the unthinkable happened. Leo, who had been watching the exchange in silence, propelled his chair forward, positioning himself between the nurse and the table. He took the small clay pot with both hands, holding it against his chest like a shield. His eyes, which for so long had seemed empty, now burned with a fierce intensity. He looked directly at Eleanor and, in a clear, firm voice he hadn't used to oppose her in months, said a single word: "No!" The no echoed in the room with the force of an explosion. Eleanor was frozen, shock plastered on her face. She was not used to being challenged, much less by him. Claire felt a thrill of pride. The small succulent had become a symbol of resistance. Leo wasn't just protecting a plant, he was defending his space, his choice, his connection to the one person who saw him as strong. The nurse, unsure how to react to this sudden show of will, took a step back. She shot a look that promised retaliation at Claire and left the room, slamming the door. Leo continued to hold the pot, his chest rising and falling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. In that moment, he wasn't a patient. He was the guardian of a small fortress of hope. The Cold War between Claire and Eleanor reached a boiling point. The nurse, feeling her authority undermined by Leo's defiance and the housekeeper's silent influence, decided to take the matter directly to Arthur. She waited for a moment when he seemed particularly overwhelmed after a long conference call about one of his company's cash flow. With an expression of grave concern, she made her case. "Mr. Sterling, I am deeply concerned about the new housekeeper. Her interactions with Leo are crossing all professional boundaries. She is encouraging behaviors that could give him false hope, which is psychologically cruel. These exercise sessions she does, the plant, they are dangerous distractions from the rigorous therapeutic regimen he needs to follow." Arthur, his mind still spinning with interest rates and dividends, massaged his temples. He was a man who trusted experts, data, qualified professionals. Eleanor was the personification of that. Claire's actions, on the other hand, were based on what? Intuition, kindness. These were not variables he knew how to quantify. "She's giving him false hope of what exactly?" he asked, his voice weary. "That he can be something he is not, an athlete, a gymnast. He needs acceptance, not fantasy. Mrs. Claire, for all her apparent goodwill, is undermining years of therapeutic work focused on realism," Eleanor argued, her voice laden with a chilling conviction. Torn and exhausted, Arthur made the easiest decision. "I will observe the situation closely. For now, just ensure Leo follows the program. No deviations." The pressure on Claire became almost unbearable. Eleanor now followed her with her eyes, criticizing every small action, reinforcing the no interaction rule. Claire felt the weight of that suspicion and considered, for a moment, backing down. Maybe the nurse was right. Who was she to interfere? She was just a housekeeper, not a therapist. Her heart was heavy with doubt. That afternoon, she passed the half-open door of the physical therapy room. The sound of a rhythmic effort caught her attention. She peeked in. Leo was alone, transferred to one of the exercise benches. With a determination that cut the air, he was trying to lift a small dumbbell. His face was a mask of concentration and pain, the muscles in his arms trembling under the strain. He failed, the weight dropping with a dull thud on the rubberized floor. He let out a sigh of frustration, but then he took a deep breath and leaned over to pick it up again. Claire's doubt evaporated like mist in the sun. That wasn't fantasy. That was work. That was courage. She wasn't selling false hope. She was merely mirroring the strength that already existed within him. Her resolve solidified, becoming unshakable. The next day, during her break, she returned to her mat in the living room. This time, the exercise was more advanced. She positioned herself for a push-up, but performed it with the slowness and control of a professional, every muscle engaged. Leo, as she knew he would, watched from the hallway entrance. He saw the concentrated strength in her arms and shoulders. Then, his eyes locked on hers, he placed his hands on the arms of his wheelchair and pushed. With a grunt that came from the depths of his soul, he lifted his entire torso off the seat, suspending his body in the air for a second that felt like an eternity, his arms trembling with the sheer power of his will. That day should have been like any other. Arthur was coming home early, a bitter sense of defeat gnawing at him. The multi-million-dollar investment in the California biotech firm, his latest and most fervent bet on science, had turned out to be a dead end. The final study results didn't show the promised efficacy. It was another closed door, another check with many zeros exchanged for a handful of nothing. The fortune he had amassed, which gave him access to the brightest minds and most advanced technologies, seemed like a sick joke. As he entered the mansion, the quiet greeted him as always. But then, a strange sound broke the silence. A sound of restrained effort, a rhythmic grunt coming from the physical therapy room, which at this hour should have been empty and dark. His heart leaped, panic icing his veins. Leo, an accident. He imagined his son fallen on the floor, hurt, alone. He ran down the hall, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing like hammer blows. He shoved the gym door open with such force that it slammed against the wall. And then he froze. The scene before him defied all logic, all the reality he had known. The room was dim, save for a single beam of the setting sun coming through a high window, illuminating the center of the room like a spotlight on a stage. And in the center of that makeshift stage, out of the wheelchair that was his prison and his world, was his son. Leo wasn't standing. He was doing something far more extraordinary. He was doing a handstand, supported firmly on his own hands, his arms locked and powerful, his shoulders defined by the effort. His entire body formed an almost perfect line, and his legs, those inert, useless legs that had been the focus of so much pain and frustrated hope, were extended in the air, straight and still, part of a sculpture of strength and balance. His fingers were dug into the rubber mat, his face red from the pressure, but his eyes were closed in a state of absolute concentration. Beside him, kneeling on the floor, was Claire. She wasn't touching him, not spotting him. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her face was turned toward the boy, lit by a smile of pure, unconditional pride. Arthur felt the floor disappear from under his feet. The air was knocked out of his lungs. He leaned against the doorframe, his legs suddenly weak. The tears that came were not the bitter tears of sorrow or frustration he knew so well. They were hot, overwhelming, a torrent of an emotion for which he had no name. It was a mixture of shock, awe, relief, and a joy so intense it hurt. In that instant, the image of his son was not that of a paralyzed boy. It was that of an athlete, a warrior, an acrobat. He saw the strength that had been born from weakness, the beauty that had bloomed in adversity. The relentless quest to fix what was broken had blinded him to the perfection of what had been built in its place. The sound of his choked sob made Leo waver. He opened his eyes, still perfectly balanced on his hands, and saw his father in the doorway. The strain on his face gave way to a slow, triumphant smile. The night that followed the scene in the gym was a long, silent vigil. The dynamic of the house, so rigid and predictable, had shattered into 1,000 pieces. After putting an exhausted but radiant Leo to bed, Arthur found Claire in the kitchen. She was simply washing a mug, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He sat at the large wooden table, a place normally used only for formal meals. And for the first time, he didn't give orders, didn't ask about protocols, didn't talk about experts. He simply said, his voice still thick with emotion, "Tell me," and Claire told him, not as an expert, but as a keen observer. She told him about the basketball, about the drawings of heroes, about the strength she saw in Leo's shoulders and torso. She told him about her own days as a gymnast and the importance of the body's core. She told him about the succulent and the small battle for autonomy. Arthur listened, and every word was a piece of a puzzle he was finally beginning to understand. He realized that in his desperate search for a cure, he had turned his son into a project, a problem to be solved, a high-risk investment whose return he demanded. Eleanor, with her clinical, realistic approach, was the perfect manager for that project. But Claire didn't see a project. She saw a person. She didn't focus on the liabilities, the legs that didn't work, but on the assets, the arms that could hold up the world. The conversation didn't last long, but it changed everything. That night, Arthur barely slept. The image of Leo's smile, upside down and victorious, seared into his mind. The next morning, the change was swift and decisive. Arthur summoned Eleanor to his office. She entered with her customary rigid posture, likely expecting him to finally take action against Claire's insubordination. He was direct, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel that brooked no argument. "Eleanor, your services are no longer required. I appreciate your time and dedication, but our views on Leo's well-being have become fundamentally different." The shock on the nurse's face was evident. Her professional coolness dissolved, revealing genuine outrage. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, you are making a terrible mistake. You are trading medical science for a housekeeper's fantasy." Arthur stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the garden. "On the contrary, Eleanor, for the first time, I am being truly realistic about who my son is, not who I wish he were. A generous severance will be deposited into your account. The house manager will see you out." Eleanor's departure was like the breaking of a spell. The air in the mansion seemed lighter. The scent of antiseptic began to dissipate. Replaced by the aroma of fresh coffee Claire was brewing in the kitchen, the house was quieter, but it was a different kind of quiet. A silence of peace, not oppression. Later, Arthur picked up the phone. He didn't call a new neurologist or an experimental research facility. He called Dr. Evans, the head physical therapist who supervised Leo's team. His voice was firm, filled with a new purpose. "Dr. Evans, I need you to come to my home today. We're having a meeting. I want a new plan for Leo, a completely new plan." The meeting with the physical therapy team was, to say the least, tense. Dr. Evans and his two assistants sat in the living room, their expressions a mixture of confusion and professional skepticism. They unfolded charts and reports, ready to discuss progress plateaus and maintenance strategies. Arthur let them speak for a few minutes and then calmly interrupted them. "Forget all of this," he said, gesturing to the papers. "I don't want to talk about what Leo can't do anymore. I want to talk about what he can." He then described the scene he had witnessed in the gym. The therapists exchanged glances. It was an impressive feat of core strength, they admitted. But what did it mean in terms of rehabilitation? The goal had always been, however remotely, the recovery of motor function in his legs. "The goal has changed," Arthur declared. At his side, Claire remained silent, but her presence was a quiet force that supported his every word. "We are no longer pursuing a cure for paralysis. We are pursuing the embrace of my son's potential. I want you to redirect all therapeutic focus to strengthening his arms, his core, his agility. I want you to research adaptive sports. I want you to train him like an athlete." The paradigm shift was so radical that the therapists were momentarily speechless. Arthur used the language they, and he, understood best. "Consider this a new type of investment. Instead of pouring capital into long-shot research with a low probability of return, we are going to apply our resources to an asset that is already showing exponential growth. Leo's upper body strength." Arthur's fortune, once used to fund distant hopes, was redirected. He didn't just pay for the therapist's hours, he challenged them, offering significant bonuses for innovation and results. He brought in consultants, the best wheelchair sports coaches in the country, to completely restructure Leo's program. The physical therapy room was transformed once again. The equipment for lower limb stimulation was put into storage. In its place, bars, ropes, weights, and even an adapted climbing wall were installed. A professional basketball hoop was set up in the backyard, the concrete painted to resemble a court. Leo flourished. The frustrating monotony of physical therapy gave way to challenging, dynamic workouts. The energy he once spent bouncing a ball against a wall was now channeled into exercises that made him stronger every day. The look of resignation on his face was replaced by a glint of focus and determination. Arthur, for his part, began to spend less time in his office tracking the volatile crypto market and more time on the makeshift court. He learned the rules of wheelchair basketball, learned how to pass, how to time shots. He became his son's biggest fan. One sunny afternoon, after an hour of intense practice, Leo, breathless and sweating, took the ball, spun his chair with astonishing speed, and from a considerable distance took a shot. The ball flew in a perfect arc and swished through the net without even touching the rim. Across the court, Arthur and Claire, who were watching, exchanged a look. It was a look of shared joy, of complicity, that held the unmistakable promise of something new and beautiful growing between them. The bond forged in mutual admiration and a shared love for Leo began to transform. The conversations between Arthur and Claire, which once were limited to updates on the boys' progress, now stretched late into the evening. Sitting in the kitchen, with the soft glow of the garden lights filtering through the window, they shared stories of their lives. The mansion, once a cocoon of silent pain, began to echo with conversation and occasional laughter. Arthur, the billionaire who dealt in currencies and whose word could steer the course of major corporations, found himself completely disarmed by Claire's simplicity and wisdom. He spoke of Laura, of the overwhelming grief of her loss, and the guilt he felt over the accident. It was the first time he had verbalized these feelings to someone other than a paid therapist. Claire, in turn, told him of her youth, of the dream of being an Olympic gymnast, the years of absolute dedication, the discipline that had shaped her character, and of the fall. A shoulder injury that ended her career abruptly, crushing her dreams, but she spoke of it without bitterness. The pain taught me that strength isn't about never falling, but about how you get back up, she said. My body couldn't fly on the bars anymore, but my spirit learned to be strong in other ways. Arthur looked at her, at the resilience in her eyes, and saw a kind of wealth his vast portfolio couldn't buy. She possessed an inheritance of inner strength that was more valuable than any treasury. He realized that while he had been desperately trying to shield Leo from the world's pain, Claire was teaching him how to turn it into power. The attraction between them was undeniable, but it grew organically, unhurriedly. It was built on the solid foundation of respect. He admired her for seeing what no one else had. She admired him for having the humility and courage to change, to abandon an impossible dream in favor of a far more beautiful reality. They became a team. Arthur handled the logistics, the coaches, the equipment. Claire tended to the soul. She made sure Leo had fun, that the pressure didn't crush him, that he remembered to celebrate every small victory. The house, once a rehabilitation center, became a home. The sound of the basketball bouncing on the court was now the family's soundtrack, a steady rhythm of effort and joy. On a Saturday night, to celebrate Leo finally mastering a particularly difficult wheelchair maneuver, they ordered pizza, something that would never have happened under Eleanor's regime. Sitting informally around the kitchen table, laughing at a joke Leo told, the atmosphere was light and happy. As Leo excitedly described his progress, Arthur looked at Claire. The kitchen light softened her features, and her eyes shone with a pride that mirrored his own. Moved by an impulse that felt like the most natural thing in the world, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was not a calculated or planned gesture. It was a silent acknowledgement that she had become the center of gravity in his new world. Claire didn't pull her hand away. She simply turned her palm upward and interlaced her fingers with his. The touch was electric, a current of unspoken emotion that sealed the promise of a future together. Leo's confidence grew exponentially with his new training regimen and the supportive environment at home. It was Arthur who suggested the next step. albeit with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. "What do you think about joining a team, a youth wheelchair basketball league, to play with other kids?" Leo's eyes widened, a mixture of excitement and fear. Competing for real was a monumental leap. Until now, his progress had been measured within the safe walls of his home. Facing the outside world, with its judgments and the harsh reality of competition, was daunting for him and secretly even more so for Arthur. He, who managed an empire of assets and liabilities, was terrified at the prospect of his son getting emotionally hurt. Claire, as always, was the voice of reason and courage. "He's ready," she told Arthur in private. "The strength he's built isn't just in his arms, it's here." She touched her own heart. He needs this. He needs to know he belongs to something bigger. And so, Leo was enrolled in the local team, the Steel Titans. The first practice was a shock. The other kids were older, faster, more experienced. They moved in their chairs with a fluidity Leo did not yet possess. He felt clumsy, slow. He missed passes, couldn't keep up with the plays. Arthur, watching from the bleachers, felt each of his son's mistakes like a physical blow. The urge to run onto the court, to pull him out of there, to protect him in his gilded bubble, was almost overwhelming. He saw the discouragement begin to settle on Leo's face, the old shadow of frustration threatening to return. But Claire, sitting beside him, placed a calming hand on his arm. "Wait, watch," she whispered. During a break, Leo wheeled himself away from the group. His head hung low. Claire walked down from the bleachers and approached him. Arthur couldn't hear what she said, but he saw her posture. She wasn't consoling him. She was speaking to him calmly but firmly, gesturing toward the court, toward the other players. She reminded him of his own journey, of his strength, of why he was there. It wasn't to be the best on the first day. It was to learn, to grow, to fight. Leo listened, the tension in his shoulders easing. He nodded. When practice resumed, something had changed. Leo wasn't faster, but he was smarter. He stopped trying to compete on speed and started using his primary asset, his core strength and the precision of his passing, honed by countless hours of shooting against a wall. He positioned himself better, anticipated plays, made crucial passes to his faster teammates. He fell, the chair tipping over. Arthur held his breath. But Leo, with the technique his coach had taught him, righted the chair and pushed himself back into the game, his face a mask of fierce determination. Arthur realized in that moment that the biggest profit his businesses could ever generate, the highest yield on any of his funds, was nothing compared to the emotional dividend of watching his son fight and refuse to quit. The first official game of the season was scheduled for the following week. The tension was palpable. In the final seconds of a tied game, the coach yelled out a play. The ball, to everyone's surprise, was passed to the rookie, Leo. He held it, the clock ticking down, with two opposing defenders converging on him like predators. The gymnasium held its breath. The squeal of rubber wheels on the polished wood floor and the shouts of the coaches faded away, replaced by the pounding of Arthur's heart in his ears. He was on his feet in the bleachers, Claire's hands holding his tightly. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The two opposing players, bigger and more experienced, bore down on Leo, forming an almost impassable wall. The path to the basket was blocked. The Leo of a few months ago would have panicked, perhaps attempted a forced, hopeless shot. But this was a new Leo. A Leo who had learned from Claire that strength isn't always in direct action, but in perception and wisdom. Instead of fighting the wall forming in front of him, he used his core strength to pivot sharply to the left. The move was so unexpected that his defenders overshot him. For a split second, he had a clear line of sight to one of his teammates, a kid named Miguel, who had gotten open under the basket. Without hesitation, Leo didn't shoot. With surgical precision, he executed a perfect bounce pass, the ball flying low and fast, zipping under the outstretched arms of the opponents. Miguel caught the ball and, with a soft touch, laid it in the basket just as the final buzzer sounded. The eruption of joy was instantaneous. The Steel Titans players converged on the center of the court, not on Miguel, the scorer, but on Leo. They surrounded him, patting his back, ruffling his hair, chanting his name. He hadn't been the hero who scored the winning point, but he had been the architect, the facilitator, the team player who made the victory possible. Amid the celebration, Leo looked up, sweaty and exhausted, and his eyes met his father's across the crowd. The smile on his face was radiant, a pure expression of triumph and belonging. In that moment, Arthur understood the true nature of overcoming. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about using the pieces you had, even the broken ones, to build something new and strong and magnificent. He was no longer the father of a paralyzed boy. He was the father of an athlete, a teammate, a winner. Later that night, the adrenaline of the game had faded, leaving behind a sense of peace and contentment. The house was quiet. Leo was sleeping the sleep of the truly spent, the game's MVP trophy on his nightstand. Arthur found Claire in the garden, watching the stars. He stood beside her, the scent of night-blooming jasmine filling the air. "For years," he began, his voice low and full of emotion, "I spent my fortune trying to buy a miracle. I wanted him to walk. I was so blinded by that one dream that I couldn't see the incredible person he already was. You showed me. You didn't try to fix him. You saw him." He turned to face her, the silvery moonlight illuminating her face. "I love you, Claire. I love you for your strength, for your kindness, and for giving me back not just my son, but myself." Claire, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She reached up and touched his face. "And I love you," she whispered, "for the man you've become." Then, under the silent gaze of the stars, she kissed him. A kiss that wasn't a beginning, but the acknowledgement of a love that had already rebuilt their world. The years that followed were a testament to the transformative power of that night. The Sterling family's narrative was no longer about loss and limitation, but about growth and boundless potential. Leo, now a 17-year-old, was a force to be reckoned with in the world of Paralympic sports. His dedication, combined with the elite training Arthur's fortune could provide, had forged him into a top-tier athlete. His room, once a sterile medical space, was now a shrine to his achievements. Gold, silver, and bronze medals hung in glittering rows, and trophies from national and international championships lined the shelves. Outshining any expensive artwork the mansion could house, he was frequently featured in sports magazines and on television, not as a story of pity, but as an inspiring example of athletic excellence. Arthur and Claire were married in a quiet, intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, with Leo serving as the best man. Their love, born amidst grief, had become the solid foundation upon which the new family was built. The house, once a mausoleum, was perpetually filled with life. Leo's friends, teammates, laughter, and the constant sound of music. Arthur found a new purpose for his immense wealth. While he remained a shrewd businessman, his primary focus shifted from the accumulation of capital to its strategic distribution. He established the Sterling Foundation for Young Athletes, a non-profit organization dedicated to funding adaptive sports programs for children and teens with disabilities across the country. He applied his financial market expertise to philanthropy, seeking not financial returns, but maximum social impact. He no longer saw his money as a tool to solve his own problems, but as a resource to empower others to overcome theirs. He viewed every donated sport wheelchair, every adapted gym that was built, as an investment in human potential, yielding dividends of hope and self-worth that far surpassed any stock market return. His life, once focused on growing his net worth, was now dedicated to growing the net worth of other people's lives. Claire was by his side every step of the way, serving as the foundation's moral and emotional compass, ensuring the focus always remained on the individuals, not the numbers. One day, an official piece of mail arrived. It was a thick envelope with the seal of the National Paralympic Committee. Arthur and Claire waited for Leo to get home from practice to open it. With steady hands but a pounding heart, Leo tore open the envelope. Inside, a formal letter invited him to the selection trials for the national team that would represent the country in the upcoming World Paralympic Games. The silence that followed was broken by a whoop of pure joy from Leo. Arthur hugged him tightly, feeling the hard muscles of his son's shoulders. The same shoulders he once looked upon with pity and which now were the foundation of a dream coming true. A dream far bigger and more real than the one he had once cherished. Looking over his son's shoulder, his eyes met Claire's. In her smile, he saw the reflection of their entire journey, a journey that proved that the real victories aren't won with your legs, but with your heart. The national team training facility buzzed with an almost palpable energy. It was a crucible of determination, where the crash of titanium wheelchairs, the thud of basketballs, and shouts of encouragement merged into a symphony of human endeavor. In the stands, Arthur and Claire sat side by side, their hands interlocked, their eyes fixed on one figure on the court. Leo, wearing the national team practice uniform, was a blur of speed and precision. He moved with a grace and authority that made him stand out even among the nation's best athletes. His wheelchair was not an aid, but an extension of his body. A tool he wielded with the skill of a master craftsman. Arthur watched every pass, every block, every shot, and his mind traveled back in time. He remembered the silent, frustrated boy throwing a ball against the wall of a room that felt more like a cell. He remembered his own blind, arrogant search for a cure, an attempt to bend reality to his will using his money like a sledgehammer. He thought of Eleanor and her limited vision, of a world where a person's worth was measured by their ability to fit a standard of normalcy. And then he looked at Claire, the woman who had walked into his life like a quiet, gentle force, and who, with her simple wisdom, had demolished the walls of his ignorance and taught him how to see. On the court, Leo was leading a fast break. With a masterful feint, he drew two defenders, creating an opening for a teammate. His pass was flawless, resulting in an easy basket. The coach blew the whistle, ending the practice. The players, exhausted but satisfied, gathered at center court. Leo's name was among those selected for the final team. A smile of pure elation lit up his face. He pumped his fist in a gesture of victory, and his first glance was to the stands, to his father and Claire. They smiled back, a trio united by an unbreakable bond, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by love. Arthur finally understood. His original dream wasn't impossible, it was just too small. He had wanted his son to walk, but fate, with the help of an extraordinary woman, had far greater plans. Leo wasn't meant to simply walk the earth. He was meant to fly across the court, to inspire millions, to redefine the limits of human capability. True strength wasn't in fixing what life had broken, but in discovering the extraordinary beauty and power that can emerge from the pieces. Their journey wasn't about overcoming a disability, but about discovering a different, deeper ability. As they left the gym, Leo between them, his wheelchair moving effortlessly alongside their steps, Arthur felt a peace that no financial transaction, no market gain could ever provide. He had found the most profitable venture of all, the investment in his family's happiness. He was no longer just a billionaire in dollars, but a multimillionaire in love, pride, and hope.